You were never really lazy, were you? Not a failure, not broken. Just a child told to be quiet when you needed to scream, punished for crying when your world was collapsing, told to smile when your soul was shivering. Now, decades later, you find yourself sitting in silence again, scrolling endlessly, searching for something nameless. That haunting emptiness isn't new, it's ancient. It has your childhood fingerprints all over it. But what if the parts of you you've been fighting so hard to fix aren't broken at all? What if your procrastination, your anxiety, your emotional shutdowns are not the symptoms of a dysfunctional adult, but the language of a wounded child still trapped inside you? You may call it laziness. The world may call it depression, but Gabor Maté calls it survival. There is something terrifyingly beautiful in that idea, that much of what we hate about ourselves today, our self-sabotage, our addictions, our emotional volatility, is not evidence of weakness, but evidence of a child who had no other choice. Do you remember when you first learned that your feelings weren't safe? That your sadness made others uncomfortable? That your anger made them withdraw their love? You began to contort yourself, shrink yourself. Please perform perfect just to stay connected. Because in childhood, love isn't optional, it's oxygen, and you would have suffocated without it. So you adapted, but you lost something in the process. The real you, the raw you, the vulnerable, vibrant child that once looked at the world with wonder and now watches it with worry. Now here you are, successful perhaps, but numb, smart but chronically anxious, capable but constantly burned out. And the question that quietly claws at your insides is not, "What's wrong with me?" but rather, "Where did I go?" And maybe, just maybe, Gabor Maté's radical insight is this: you didn't lose your inner child. You just buried them under trauma, under conditioning, under the unbearable pressure to be who others needed you to be. But here's the paradox. The very survival strategies that saved you as a child are now silently killing your spirit. So what if healing isn't about becoming someone new? What if healing is about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be? That's the great question. And in the next section, we'll confront the hidden architecture of this emotional exile, where the pain truly began, and why it continues to echo through your adult life. Are you ready to look beneath the surface? You learn to survive by disconnecting from yourself. That's the quiet horror of childhood trauma, not just in the grand, obvious wounds of abuse or neglect, but in the subtle, chronic abandonment of who you truly were. Not because your parents were monsters, but because they were human, and often hurting too. You see, most trauma isn't what happened to you, it's what didn't happen. The comfort that never came, the validation that was always delayed, the gaze that never fully met yours. Psychologically, this trauma lives in omission, and philosophically, it lives in distortion of meaning, of identity, of connection. Gabor Maté doesn't define trauma by the event, but by the wound it leaves. And that wound, more than anything else, is the severance of self. You lost contact with your authenticity to maintain attachment. You chose love over truth, because as a child, there was no other choice. Carl Jung would call this the genesis of the persona, the false self created to be accepted. It's the mask you wear not out of deception, but out of desperation. The good boy, the perfect girl, the achiever, the peacekeeper, roles you didn't just play, but became. And what happens to a child who becomes a role instead of a soul? They grow up hollow. They master the art of performing and forget how to feel. You might know this hollowness well. You smile when you're sad. You give when you're empty. You function, but you don't feel alive. Because the real you, the spontaneous, feeling flawed, free self, was exiled a long time ago. Nietzsche once wrote, "The snake which cannot shed its skin must perish." But what if the opposite is true too? What if the self that sheds too much skin, too much truth, also begins to die? Not a dramatic death, but a slow one. Death by 1,000 emotional concessions. Modern society praises productivity, not presence. Conformity, not consciousness. And so we raise children not to be themselves, but to be useful, agreeable, efficient. You were likely taught what to think before you were taught how to feel. And in that exchange, you learn to suppress the inconvenient parts of you. Anger, fear, vulnerability, all labeled as too much or inappropriate. But here's what Gabor Maté emphasizes. Those emotions never vanish. They fester. They resurface as anxiety, autoimmune disorders, addictions, burnout, depression, because the body keeps the score and the inner child never forgets. Now think about that. You weren't born numb. You learned to numb. You weren't born ashamed. You inhaled shame from a culture that rewards masks and punishes truth. And that's the deeper problem, isn't it? It's not just a personal wound, it's a collective illness. A society that treats sensitivity as weakness, trauma as drama, and healing as indulgence. A culture that pathologizes emotional honesty and normalizes emotional suppression. Jean-Paul Sartre said, "We are our choices." But what if some of our most important choices were made in moments when we had no real power to choose? What if the way you show up today isn't a reflection of your character, but a reflection of a wound you've mistaken for your identity? You see, healing isn't just about knowing what hurt you. It's about understanding why you stopped being you and how to find your way back. But it's terrifying, isn't it? To go back, to revisit the soft, forgotten places, to hold the hand of the child you left behind and say, "I'm here now." You don't have to hide anymore. And so we stay busy, we stay numb, we stay addicted, because the pain of remembering feels unbearable until the pain of forgetting becomes even worse. This is the hidden architecture of the problem. A society allergic to vulnerability, a psyche split into fragments, an adult shell housing a neglected child. But the question you must ask yourself is this: are you willing to stop performing and start listening? In the next section, we'll trace the unseen consequences of this emotional exile. How this split self shapes your relationships, health, choices, and very perception of life. The damage isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers, but its effects are everywhere. You think you're moving forward. You're checking boxes, work, family, goals. From the outside, you look together. But inside, something is missing. Not in a dramatic falling apart kind of way. It's quieter, like a ghost that haunts your success. A strange emptiness just beneath the surface of everything. This is the legacy of the lost inner child. The adult you've become is not a villain. He or she is simply a survivalist. You've built walls to protect what was once soft but vulnerable. You've turned pain into performance. And over time, this way of being has woven itself so tightly into your identity that you've stopped questioning it. But the consequences are everywhere. Start with your relationships. Why do you attract emotionally unavailable people? Why do you keep people at arm's length, even the ones you love? Why does closeness feel threatening, even when you crave it? Because the child inside you still believes that being seen equals being hurt. That vulnerability is dangerous. That love must be earned through perfection or performance. So you stay emotionally guarded, not because you're cold, but because you're terrified. Or look at your career. Why do you grind yourself into burnout? Why do you chase achievements that leave you feeling emptier than before? Why is rest synonymous with guilt? Because that inner child still believes they are only worthy when they do, not when they are. You measure your worth in output because the original wound told you you're only lovable when you're useful. And then there's your body. Do you think your anxiety is random? That your migraines, stomach issues, or fatigue are just bad luck? Gabor Maté has spent decades showing that the body absorbs the emotional burdens the mind refuses to process. Your immune system, your nervous system, your hormones, they're all listening. When you suppress rage, your body tightens. When you deny grief, your breath shallows. When you fake joy, your heart knows the lie. The world calls it normal. But what we call normal is often just deeply adapted suffering. You see, unhealed trauma is not always obvious. Sometimes it's high functioning. Sometimes it hides behind productivity, politeness, or positivity. But it still leaks into your choices, your tone, your relationships, your dreams. Have you ever sabotaged something good without knowing why? Pushed someone away just when it was getting real? Frozen when life asked you to take a step forward? That's not laziness. That's not dysfunction. That's the child in you saying, I don't feel safe here. Let that sink in. You might be abandoning your future because you were abandoned in your past. You might be shrinking in life, not because you're weak, but because you were never taught it was safe to expand. And culturally, it's not much better. We live in an age of performance over presence, noise over nuance, stimulation over stillness. Our entertainment numbs us. Our timelines distract us. Our connections feel more like surveillance than intimacy. In such a world, the inner child has no home, no quiet space to feel, no unconditional holding, only the endless pressure to keep up, shut down, and stay masked. So what happens when you live year after year disconnected from your inner world? You start to believe that your numbness is personality, that your anxiety is identity, that your exhaustion is just life. But it's not. It's a signal, a whisper from the younger you. Please come back to me. I've been waiting. This isn't spiritual fluff. It's biology. It's psychology. It's your nervous system asking for coherence, your soul asking for truth. And if you don't answer the call, you don't just suffer. You forget how to live. Not just function, but actually live, feel deeply, love fully, and exist without the constant hum of self-rejection. In the next section, we'll explore what it takes to rebel against this lifelong pattern. We'll ask the hard questions. What does it really mean to break free? And how do you begin healing when the pain feels ancient, even pre-verbal? What if healing isn't about becoming someone new, but about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be? You don't need fixing, you need finding. And to find what's lost, you must first rebel against what's false. This rebellion isn't loud, it's not violent. It doesn't look like revolution. It looks like softness in a world that worships hardness. It looks like honesty in a culture of performance. It looks like turning toward the pain when every instinct says to run. Here's the radical truth. Healing begins when you stop abandoning yourself. You stop gaslighting your own feelings with mantras like, it's not that bad. You stop shaming yourself for reactions that began as survival. You stop pretending that childhood wounds are irrelevant in adulthood, because they're not. They are the blueprint. They shape how you see yourself, what you believe you deserve, and how safe you feel in your own body. Gabor Maté teaches that trauma is not what happens to you, it's what happens inside you as a result. It's the story you tell yourself about your worth. It's the self you had to bury just to feel accepted. And healing is the sacred act of digging that self back up piece by piece with tenderness. So how do you start? 1. You listen. Not to podcasts or gurus, but to yourself. To the anxiety in your chest. To the tension in your jaw. To the numbness that creeps in when something hits too close. These are not malfunctions. They are messages. Ask, what are you trying to protect me from? And wait. Don't analyze, feel. 2. You reparent. If your inner child never felt seen, then you become the witness now. You speak to yourself the way you wish someone had spoken to you at age 5, at 10, at 16. You're not too much. It's okay to be scared. I see you. I'm not going anywhere. This isn't silly. It's necessary, because no amount of adult achievement can fill the void left by childhood neglect. 3. You stop outsourcing your worth. The inner child wants love, but too often seeks it in validation, performance, or control. To break free, you must pull back from the need to be enough for others. You must learn to disappoint others before you betray yourself. Radical, isn't it? That healing sometimes looks like saying no without an explanation, like crying without apologizing, like resting without earning it. The world may call it selfish, but it's sacred. Because every time you honor your truth, you send a message to your nervous system. I am safe now. And slowly, the trauma begins to loosen its grip. Not vanish, but evolve. It becomes a scar, not an open wound. A reminder, not a ruler. Let's be clear, healing is not a straight line. It's a spiral. You revisit the same wounds, but each time with deeper wisdom, softer eyes, a slower breath. You may lose people, but you'll find yourself. You may shatter the image others have of you, but in doing so, you'll stop shattering yourself just to keep their version alive. And that's freedom. Not the kind sold on billboards or shouted by influencers, but the quiet, revolutionary freedom of coming home to your body, your truth, your story, because the child inside you never needed to be more. They only needed to be held. Now it's your turn to become the parent you never had, to break the chain, to rewrite the ending. You don't have to wait until you're completely healed to start living differently. Start clumsily, start painfully, start anyway. Because rebellion isn't perfection, it's presence. And every time you show up for yourself, the inner child whispers back, "Thank you. I knew you'd come." In the final section, we'll uncover the ultimate realization, the one truth that ties it all together, the paradigm shift that not only heals, but transforms. There comes a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, where you stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start asking, "What happened to me?" It's in that subtle shift that the deepest healing begins. Because what if the truth is, there was never anything wrong with you to begin with? What if all the guilt, the shame, the self-loathing was never yours to carry? What if lazy, dramatic, too sensitive, difficult were just labels pasted over a soul trying to survive? This is the final, most powerful realization. You were always whole. You were just never witnessed in your wholeness. The pain you carry isn't a sign of your brokenness. It's a scar map, a testament to how deeply you felt, how fiercely you longed, how creatively you adapted. Every coping mechanism was intelligence. Every shutdown was protection. Every self-sabotage was an unconscious scream, "See me, help me, love me." Gabor Maté speaks of authenticity versus attachment. As children, when the two collide, we sacrifice authenticity for attachment. Because without love we die, so we become who they want us to be. We abandon our truth slowly, subtly, until the mask feels like skin. But masks can't breathe. And one day, you wake up suffocating in a life that doesn't feel like your own. That's not failure. That's the signal. That's the invitation. The ultimate truth is this: healing is not about becoming better. It's about becoming real. You aren't healing to be productive, or impressive, or even happy. You're healing to become true. To remember what it feels like to be in your body without fear, to speak without rehearsing, to rest without guilt, to love without bargaining. This is the revolution no one talks about. Not changing your life, but changing your relationship to yourself. From enemy to ally, from critic to caregiver, from stranger to sanctuary. You were born whole. You were fractured by a world that didn't know how to hold you. But now you know how. Now you choose differently. You choose not to override your pain with performance, not to dismiss your feelings with platitudes, not to abandon yourself for approval. You choose truth even when it trembles. You choose presence even when it aches. You choose love, not as a reward but as your right. And here's the final paradox. The more you return to your inner child, the more your adult self becomes whole. Because that child never needed to be erased, only embraced. So go gently. Let the tears fall. Let the anger rise. Let the numbness thaw. This is the sacred unraveling, the unbecoming, the soft death of the false self. So the real you can rise, not polished but present, not perfect but powerful. And when that happens, when you meet your inner child in the ruins and hold them like no one ever did, you will feel it, not in your mind but in your bones. The quiet knowing, I am home. Not because the world changed, but because you stopped abandoning yourself. That is the miracle. That is the truth. That is the beginning of everything.